Good evening and welcome. Today we journey to Japan, a country where mountains, forests, and seas are filled with spirits, gods, and stories that have shaped its culture for millennia. This is the complete story of Japanese mythology and folklore. Where did the gods come from? How was the world created? And how did myths of storms, the sun, and shadows become part of everyday life? We begin with the creation of the islands, the birth of the gods Izanagi and Izanami, and the legend of the sun goddess Amaterasu. Then we will pass through stories of fox spirits, ghosts, and heroes who met monsters with courage and grace. These are tales where beauty mixes with mystery and history with imagination. Stories that even today echo in the temples, festivals, and quiet corners of Japan. As always, I would very much like to know from what part of the world you are listening to me and what time it is for you now. If you enjoy these stories, please take a moment to leave a comment and subscribe. It is the simplest way to support the channel, and it means a great deal to me. Thank you for being here. Now let us begin. In the silence that preceded time, there was only the slow breathing of darkness. It was neither empty nor full, neither cold nor warm, a stillness that held the promise of every future movement. This silence was not a void in the sense that a cave is empty. It was the cradle of the first memory, a place where the seeds of light and matter drifted like pollen in air that had not yet learned to stir. From this meaningful silence, the subtle began to separate from the dense. That which was light rose to as yet unnamed heights, while that which was heavy sank to a place that would one day feel the tread of feet. Between them waited a misty space, a field of uncultivated possibilities. From that which rose, an abode of purity emerged. It was called the high plane of heaven, a realm so refined that no shadow could cling to its edges. From that which settled, the land emerged which would later become known as the central land of reed plains. Raw, wet, and restless, a world like a marsh that dreamed of becoming a country. Before oceans appeared, before mountains found their ridges, before trees knew the patience of annual rings, only tendencies existed. The world's first inclinations. It is in such precarious places that gods are born. The first gods appeared as thoughts given form by their own clarity. They descended from no one. They rose from the very fabric of being and opened their eyes. They were creators without hands, minds that established law before the courts of stars appeared. Among them were entities whose names sound like the beginning of beginnings. There was the Lord of the august center of heaven, a ruler in stillness. There were the divine creators whose names themselves feel like inhalation and exhalation. None of them required marriage or birth. They were of themselves and from themselves. And when their work in that first radiance was finished, they receded like a tide, leaving the shore glowing. Behind them, in quiet groups, other deities rose, each a thread in the rope that would bind heaven to earth. They were not the ones to give the world its islands and its weather. They were the soil upon which such deeds would become possible. As generations of early gods passed, the creative task was handed down an invisible chain until it reached a pair destined for the heavy labor of creation. Their names possessed the power of ceremony, the male who invites and the female who invites, Izanagi and Izanami. They were not a couple in the sense that mortals are joined by a long thread of shared days. They were a pair chosen by a council of deities, who understood that the world below was frozen in beautiful incompleteness. The high plane needed builders with patience and audacity, and the central land of reed plains needed parents. There is a bridge that is neither a beam nor a rope, a span hanging between the world we can taste and the world we imagine when we close our eyes. The gods called it the floating bridge of heaven. On this unsupported path stood the inviting pair, their robes fluttering in a wind that had not yet learned directions. Into Izanagi's hands was placed a spear that was also a symbol, a shaft adorned with jewels that did not so much sparkle as glow. It was the heavenly jeweled spear, no simple tool, for its point knew how to find the heart of chaos. The world beneath them stirred like the skin of a sleeping creature. It was sea and not sea, a softness beneath which the bones of the earth waited. The two leaned forward, as a midwife leans toward the sound of a first cry. Together they lowered the spear and plunged its point into the abyss. They did not strike. First, they stirred cautiously. Then, in a rhythm that weaves threads into fabric, the spear rose, heavy with shining droplets that fell back as slow pearls. Where each drop struck the surface of the uncreated sea, a crust formed and thickened. It gathered, became a mound, then a mass, and finally an island, the first firmament under heaven. They called it Onogoro, which means spontaneously curdled, a place that decided for itself to become a place. In every beginning, there are its own beginnings. The new land required a center, and the pair of creators descended from the floating bridge onto the still wet soil. In the very heart of Onogoro, they erected a pillar, so graceful and high that it seemed a reed growing infinitely upward. On this pillar, which was simultaneously the axis of the world and the first architectural creation, Izanagi and Izanami performed a rite. They circled it in opposite directions, as if tying a knot in the air. Passing each other, they exchanged greetings, and in that moment, the first word sounded for the earth's ear. Their first attempt at union produced a child who was not perfect, a poor creature without bones, unable to stand. The island that lived within this first child was uninhabitable and was set adrift on the waves. They brought their sorrow to the gods who had entrusted them with the labor, and in that council, the error was understood. Form has its etiquette. Words must be spoken in the correct order. If the one whose turn has not yet come speaks first, harmony is broken. They returned to the pillar, circled it again, spoke in their proper turn, and in this precise ceremony found the answer that opens any locked gate. When they joined after the corrected rite, the earth responded. The great 8 islands were born. They did not arise all at once, like sparks from a flint strike. They came as a family comes one after another, each with its own face. First rose a warrior, long and gentle creature, stretched between other lands, not yet revealed to the world. Following it emerged Shikoku, multifaceted and calm, Oki, Kyushu and Iki, Tsushima and Sado, and finally Honshu, the great backbone of the archipelago, raised its shoulders from the sea. The people who would one day travel these shores were as yet only a dream of clay, but their roads were already being drawn. Rivers learned their courses. Winds remembered routes. Coastlines traced graceful brackets around future lives. Izanagi and Izanami did not stop at the islands. They set about filling the world with its textures. They brought forth gods who would dwell in the tides and currents, who would rule the mist and rain, who would occupy the thrones of mountains and the nests of valleys. There were deities of marshes and ferns, of the bark protecting the tree, and the sap rising through its veins. They gave life to the gods of bast fiber and weaving, of rice and the dikes that subdued the rice fields. They exhaled the guardians of roofs and hearths, of thresholds and roads. The catalogue of spirits grew, becoming long and beautiful. It seemed the pair was painting a picture with living colors, where every stroke was a god with their own tasks and stories. In their palace on Onogoro, which now stood not as a lonely island, but as the first of many, joy and purpose reigned. Creation is a high intoxication, leaving the creator radiant and exhausted. They rested between labors and planned the birth of the next children of the earth. The sea was salted and endowed with tides. Rivers learned to snake across the plains. The first forests raised their layered canopies, and the first cranes rehearsed that cautious dance that would delight the eyes of future generations. Night did not yet possess all the weight of its velvet. Day did not yet carry the glory of its crown. These joys waited for their hour. In time, Izanami felt a fierce heat rising within her from another birth. This birth was not like the others. There are gifts wrapped in danger. There are boons that require a price. She labored, and the world held its breath. And in the moment the child slipped into the light, flame ran through her, as if the sun had decided to be born through a mortal door. The child was a spirit of fire given flesh. His name was Kagitsuchi. Flame is simultaneously a feast and a plague. It is both hearth and ash. The first breath of the fire child scorched the mother who had given him life. Izanami lay pale and motionless, the edges of her robe shriveled. Her lips cracked from the kiss of the heat she had brought into the world. The palace, which had rung with delight, grew silent. Izanagi took the child into his arms, whose presence still crackled in the air, and trembled with rending love and sudden rage. There is a grief that makes a god act like a man, in an impulse that was half justice and half the helpless anger of a husband. Unable to bring his wife back from the distant shore, Izanagi drew his blade. He struck. The radiant boy of fire perished by his father's hand, and from the blood that gushed from the wound, new and formidable powers burst forth. The divine principle is prolific even in death. From the blood spatters emerged mountains and rivers, and gods possessing the power of molten stone where parts of the severed body fell to the ground. New spirits rose, who would one day be called upon to shape minds and forge plows and swords. If sorrow has any mercy at all, it is that sorrow is not sterile. The world multiplies even when it mourns. Izanagi approached his wife and knelt before her. She was not cold. She was slipping away, as if drawn by a gentle current whose direction he could not know. Servants laid out her hair and covered her with robes, trying to deny the truth that had descended like a black bird onto the beam of this house. Izanagi spoke to her in that quiet voice gods use when they are afraid. He told her the sea needed her. He told her the mountains asked for her counsel. He told her he had done a terrible thing, but was ready to pluck the stars one by one, if it would hold her. She was already listening to a sound he could not hear. The land of the dead was not yet a place of punishments and scales. It was a realm of return and rest, a shaded mirror of the world above. Izanami drifted toward it as if walking along a long beach at twilight. The water she entered was not wet. The light that welcomed her was neither dawn nor darkness, but an eternal afterglow. She looked back only once, and even in that glance, her eyes were already clouded by the lure of that land. There is a boundary that no hand can hold, not even the hand of a god who created islands with a spear. In the halls of Onogoro, a great silence pressed upon the carved columns. The gods of the wind muffled their songs. The gods of the rivers hid their music beneath the stones. Izanagi felt the void that follows the extinguishing of life. Wise sorrow knows that the world does not stop when one heart stops. Rice shoots will still seek the light. Sand will still take the shape of every footprint and forget it. But he was not wise. He was a husband, and he loved the one who had gone to a land that had closed its gates to please. He decided to break that bolt. The high plane had chosen him for his resolve, and now he would set it against the most ancient gates. He would descend. He would find the entrance to the hidden kingdom and bring her back. This thought was a flame that did not burn his hands. It lit his way along the crumbling edge of the seas and through gorges where the air smelled of fern and rust. He descended through caves that sighed with breaths not his own. He descended until the voice of the living world was but a hum behind him, and the voice of the underworld trembled before him, a voice that had the shape of a corridor lined with sealed doors. The entrance to Yomi was not a door. It was the negative of a door, a place where a passage decided not to end. He stood at its edge and felt the cool breeze that had never touched the sun. And he entered. First, there was a light like the light under eyelids. Then it, too, faded, and he learned to walk by the memory of her hand. He called her name. It sounded like a bell in the snow. From afar came answers, voices that could have been water, or could have been sorrow talking to itself. He called again, and this time his voice touched something that turned toward him. She was there not as he would have wished to see her, not as she had been beside him on Onogoro, radiant as the skin of a fresh seed, but there, in those shadows, her shadow moved, and his heart leaped to his throat like a fish startled by a shadow. He reached out to her. She withdrew with a gentle firmness. She spoke softly, and her words did not ring like words born in sun-drenched air. She told him that she had tasted the food of that land. This act binds tighter than an oath. The grains of that table had dissolved within her and created a covenant. She wanted to return, but the law of the far side of the rock is clear. She would plead for mercy from the lords of that realm. She implored him not to look at her until she received their permission. Promise, she said. And he promised. He was a god, but he was also a husband in a land of doubts, oaths given in dim need, and the bright discipline of patience. Izanagi waited, in a place where waiting does not flow like a river, but stands like a wall. How long he waited no measure remembers. The silence in such places thickens until it becomes necessary to cut it. Finally, fear bent his promise. He fumbled for the torch he carried and hid. He coaxed a spark into a flame and raised it. The light took the room into its hands and showed him what it concealed. He saw his wife. He saw the bride of his memories wearing the terrible crown of the land that devours its guests. Her flesh had accepted the changes of this place. In her hair lurked creatures of thunder with faces like clenched fists. In her mouth lived secrets gnawing at their prison. Heavy shadows hung from her skin like vines from an old tree. This sight broke him in a way no blade could. He cried out. The sound woke the house. The guardians of that land stirred. She, who had implored him not to look, felt the betrayal like a blade against her ribs. In the world above, there are chases that end at a fence. In the world below, the chase ends at a stone. Izanagi fled, and the guardians of Yumi fled after him, and in their mouths were frogs, and in their hands the tools of hunger. He escaped by the light of a small flame, and that flame trembled in the wind of their pursuit. He came to a place where the earthly passage narrows. He tore out a boulder that was not just a stone but a law, and wedged it into the crevice. The guardians hammered at it with the blunt fury of ritual. On one side, he breathed heavily a god with ash on his fingers. On the other side stood she, with that composure that anger brings when it wears sorrow like a mantle. She spoke to him through the rock. Her voice had a weight capable of bending iron. She told him that he had shamed her. She said that because of this betrayal, she would drag down 1,000 living souls every day. He pressed his palm against the stone and replied with a fury that was also resolve. Then I will give life to 1,500 infants every day. Thus, life would outnumber death, and the living would have a fragile advantage. Between these two phrases, the balance of the world was forged into a blade that cuts us all. He left the stone where it lay and climbed back through the veins of the earth. When he emerged into the light of the upper world, the sun lay upon his shoulders like a shawl. He did not raise his face to it. He carried upon him what the underworld always gives to those who walk it: the scent of ends, the dust of places where names fall away. He was unclean, and though the defilement of a god is not like that of a human, a stain remains a stain. He went to a pure river that knew how to forget the tracks of birds. At its edge, he removed the clothes that had touched the caves. From these clothes, as he set them aside, spirits rose. The ribbon that bound his hair unrolled, and a deity stepped from the smooth curve. His sandals came off, and tiny gods clambered out of the pressed straw. In the high air, another power shook itself out, so that the very act of undressing was like throwing a handful of seeds into a plowed field. He entered the river, and the water closed around his calves with the sigh of a returning friend. He cupped water in his palms and moistened his lips. The taste was the complete opposite of Yumi. It was not thick. It was not old. It was the first brightness poured into a cup. He washed his left eye, and from that washing rose a brilliant goddess who seemed to carry daylight beneath her skin. He washed his right eye and looked up to the sky, and from that washing shone a god whose silver tranquility spoke of the slow march of months. He blew the last remnants of the underworld air from his nose, and from that breath appeared a god who walked with a storm at his heels, and a sea wind in his hair. 3 noble children stood on the shore, as if they had always been waiting to be called by their true names. The sun smiled in the face of the first. The moon bowed in the pasture of the second. The third looked at the horizon and saw waves rising like a herd of white-maned beasts. That moment at the river is one of the great turns of the world. With it, the upper air found its rulers. The sun goddess took her place on the high plain, and wherever she looked, green things remembered that growth is a command. The moon god learned the secrets of cool wanderings and marked the steps by which the sea breathes. To the bringer of storms was entrusted the care of restless waters and the winds that sting them. Their father stood on the stones and felt the last impurity of Yoni fall away from him. Like old leaves, he had lost his wife. He gained balance and children in that loss. The world is a market that insists on exchanges. We hate it. We live by it. From that day, the creation of the world entered a new order. The sun and the moon learned their paths. The islands that had felt the sadness of their first mother now tasted the milk of the proper seasons. Cranes practiced their winter migrations. Rice practiced the logic of tides. The gods of the hills and rivers added a new line to their prayers, for they felt in these three new entities the beginning of an apology. Until that time, the land had been a village of scattered households. Now, heaven had given birth to a court. A court means more than thrones. It means wars and reconciliations, exiles and returns, contests that end in laughter, and contests that end in blood. Onogoro watched, its pillars still soaring toward the untouched blue. Izanagi turned away from the water and walked off, somewhere under the same sky, on the other side of the great stone. His first beloved became a queen in a realm that mortals learn to call by many names. He did not call her again. A promise once broken is not a rope that can be pulled. Instead, he looked at the footprints of his children where they stood for the first time and realized that the story he had begun now belonged to them. The light would go into a cave and come out again. The storm would make mistakes, but also create wonders. The moon would separate from the sun and teach lovers to miss one another. Everything to come was already set in motion. Gods would laugh and cry, break and mend the world as only immortals can. Serpents would drink wine and fall to swords. Heroes would be led by trickery to wisdom. Land would be offered and seeded. A grandson would descend the heavenly ladder, set his foot upon the soil, and call the fields to an order that would one day be written in laws and songs. Meanwhile, the river flowed, and the god who had washed away the scent of the underworld shook his hair and felt pure. In that purity was sorrow. Purity does not erase the imprint left by love. It does not smooth the bed where to lay, nor does it level the stone against which a hand pressed. Izanagi carried the outline of his grief like a mark carved into a tree. This mark would be read by those who come after. It would be retold. It would be the reason fathers stand with stern faces on thresholds, while mothers teach children that food taken from another's table is chains. The first chapter in any world is a chapter of separations. Heaven separates from earth, so each can become the best of itself. The river separates from the sea, so tastes differ and migrations make sense. Life separates from death, and then must live with the knowledge that this barrier is both true and thin. The stone in Yoni is both a door and a wall. The spear that stirred the first island is both a bridge and a boundary. Gods who know all this tread carefully. Gods who forget it learn from their bruises. The rest listen to their stories and try to extract a rule for their small lives. All this was inscribed in the fibers of the world. When the first island solidified beneath the falling drops from the jeweled spear, the palace in the center of Onogoro still stands in the imagination of the faithful. Its pillar rises like a phrase that never ends. The names of the 8 great islands are still spoken as if each were a bead worn by years of use. The tale of the fire child still sounds by hearts that sometimes forget mercy. The story of the boulder stuck in the mouth of the earth is still whispered when saying farewell to those who will not return. From the riverbank where the father found 3 sudden fires on the surface of the water, the world leaned forward toward its next tale. It leaned toward the brothers and sister whose quarrels and reconciliations would weave a net strong enough to hold a nation. It leaned toward the dragon whose tails would be severed, and toward the sword that would pass from hand to hand like a promise. It leaned toward the fields that would shine with rice, and toward the shrines that would cleanse the air with cedar and silk. The first breath had been taken. The second was approaching. The book had been opened by the spear's point, and the pillar held the page against the wind. Sorrow is a teacher with a dark lamp. When Izanami slipped behind the stone of endings, Izanagi learned what no creator wishes to know. Even a god can become small from the loss of a companion. The islands he had coaxed from the ocean foam stood, where he had left them green and obedient. And yet, the air of Onogoro tasted of ash. Servants muffled their steps. The pillar at the navel of the world seemed taller and lonelier. In this silence, Izanagi chose an impossible path. If love had seated a queen in the land of shadows, love would cross the threshold and ask her to return. He began with science. In the shrines of the high plain, the elder gods cast lots and read omens that fell down like pale leaves. The lot declared that the passage to the other realm lay where the skin of the earth becomes thin and cold. Izanagi wrapped himself in traveling clothes and took a staff that knew the history of every tree. He set out along the edge of the islands, where cliffs speak in the pure language of stone. He crossed beaches of new sand that crunched under his sandals and walked past river mouths, where gulls rehearsed their shrill quarrels. No song of mortals marked his path. He was a husband, and that was enough. The entrance to Yomi does not announce itself with gates. It is discovered by a change in the world's breath. The wind from the sea grew still. The insects forgot their roles. The earth lost its warmth, as if the sun had decided to look into another story. A crack opened in a hillside overgrown with ancient moss, and behind it, a corridor receded into patient darkness. Izanagi did not call out. He knew that names have power, and his own name he had already spent once on a broken promise. He studied his heart and descended. The first turn in this corridor tasted of iron. The second smelled of rain that would never come. The third swallowed sound so completely that even thoughts seemed to put on soft shoes. He met no guards at the threshold. That custom belongs to later ages. Yomi, in its first telling, receives the brave and allows them to prove whether they are worthy of regret. Izanagi walked until the pressure of the earth above began to feel like a palm on his head. Then the passage opened not into a lush hall, but into a country where color had forgotten its duties. There were plains lit by a light that came from neither sun nor moon. There were hills that remembered winter but did not know how to name it. He called to her then, and the name soared like a kite that had lost its string. A figure stirred on that pale plain, and the world tilted back toward order. Izanami stood before him. She was hidden by the veil of the law of the place she had entered, and her voice reached him as if from behind woven reeds. She told him she had partaken of the food of Yoni. To eat in that land is to promise to stay. She begged him to wait while she asked the kings below to release her. He must not look at her until permission was given. There were reasons that had no place in the sunlight. He swore to obey. Patience is a high right, and he almost preserved it. The silence grew heavy as roof tiles, and then heavier still. He felt the old fear begin to crawl, small and stubborn, and he turned away from the appointed place and found a breach in the wall where a root had grown. He coaxed fire from a spark and fed it with splinters from his staff. The flame flared. He raised it. The light showed him what love rarely wishes to know. Izanami, sovereign of the first cradle world, appeared as the mistress of ends. Her body had accepted the order of Yoni. The proud features of her face were burdened by a law that devours beauty, and calls that devouring sacred. And her crouched 8 spirits of thunder small, cruel, and swift. Each had nested in a ruined place of her flesh. In her mouth pulsed a darkness that was not breath. In her hair, dead winds had found a home. He cried out, "Grief can be loud enough to wake a city. It can also be loud enough to wake a nation of shadows." The cry swept across the plain and through the corridors, and the guards of that land stirred. In old tales, they are called the women of Yomi, but they are rather rags of hunger-given sinew. Their hair is dry grass. Their eyes are lentils that have been boiled too long. They came at a small trot of hunger. Izanami also cried out, not from pity, but from rage. A promise broken at the edge of the world is an insult that not even love can smooth over. She summoned the guards to seize him. Izanagi fled. At first, he fled like a god, swift and confident, and then like a man whose steps fear shattered to pieces. The guards were catching up. He reached into his sleeve and tore out the black headpiece that marked his rank, and hurled it behind him. In the blink of an eye, it became a vineyard heavy with glistening clusters, The guards set to eating, tearing at the fruit with a rage older than manners. He ran on. When the sound of their chewing died away, he tore the comb from his hair and threw it on the path. It exploded into bamboo, thick and tender. Shoots pushed upward, as if they had always been planted there. The guards stopped again to eat their fill, for even in the underworld, young shoots taste of spring. He ran on. Hunger did not delay them for long. They came after him with red mouths, and he heard a sound like the rustle of a burial shroud being dragged over gravel. He saw a tree that remembered the sky and scrambled up it, but the bark crumbled under his fingers. He leaped, rolled, stood up, and in that moment might have faltered. But ahead stood a grove of low trees full of round, pale treasures. He seized 3 fruits and hurled them with a prayer that named them for their sweetness. The fruits shattered against the earth, and their fragrance, like a blade, cut through the pursuing pack. Even shadows retreat before peaches. The guards recoiled from the perfume and shrank back, spitting curses. Izanagi ran through the gap they left and reached the place where the world narrows into a throat. There the passage rose toward a grey light. He climbed and emerged into a moor in the earth wider than city gates. On this side, the air held the memory of birds. On that side, pressure mounted, as if an army were climbing his spine. He turned, lifted a stone that was also an edict, and closed the crevice with it. The stone was so large, it seemed the earth had only been waiting to hand it to him. He propped it up and felt the thrust from below weaken, then cease. From the other side came a voice with the taste of iron filings. Izanami called him treacherous. She vowed to take 1,000 of the living every day to sit at her tables. He replied with the stubborn mercy of a creator, promising that in return, 1,500 would be born. Between these 2 phrases, the daily arithmetic of the world found its measure. He stood with his palms against the stone and knew that the first part of the story had closed its door. For her, there would be no return, no reconciliation of hearth and grave. There would be balance. The stone has a name in legends. Some call it the Rock of Evenings. Others, the weight against which tears break. Names of this kind are a sort of bandage for a wound. They keep out the air and allow the skin to knit. He did not return to Onogoro. He brought the scent of Yumi in his clothes and hair, and it bit in like smoke. In the order of the gods, contact with death brings defilement. Purity is not whiteness. It is readiness. It is a state in which powers wishing for good can speak through you. Izanagi headed for the Tachibana River in the sunny land of Himuka, to a place where pure water flows over stones that remember nothing. He took off his sandals and set them aside, and this act released small spirits curled inside the woven reed. He loosened his belt, and another spirit took form from the untied cord. He removed his clothing, and from its folds rose deities with the characters of fresh breezes. History says even his staff managed to become a god when it felt the earth again. He entered the river, and the water shuddered like a friend surprised by a returning guest. He washed his left hand, and a flock of koni began to gather on that bank like birds. Each of them was a minor guardian with a task concerning the edges of things. He washed his right hand, and the same happened. Then he scooped river water with his palms and splashed it on his face. He began with the left eye. The water caught the sun and threw it back, and from this radiance rose a goddess with a posture that could instruct kings. Her brilliance was not a blinding glare. It was the active peace of noon. She stood, her hair tied by the horizon, and she raised her gaze. The water ran to her feet and seemed content to end there. She spoke her name, and the stones listened. She was Amaterasu, she who shines on the plain of heaven. He washed his right eye, and this washing called forth another light. It was cool and measured, the kind of light that tells shepherds to fold their tents. From this washing rose a god in whose face patience and distance were wedded. This was Tsukuyomi, lord of measured nights, who would keep count of the months for fishermen and teach the silver fish of the sky to be ours. He did not smile. His presence was a tenderness woven with law. Finally, Izanagi pinched one nostril and exhaled the air of Yomi still clinging there. From this proud gesture was born a god whose step was the length of the weather. He smelled of salt and the steely taste of rain. He was Susanoo, the restless one, with hair like a storm front and a spirit that found kinship with every wave, that beat against the rock and beat upon it again. He stamped once, and the river gave a respectful bow. The three stood on the pebbled shore, sisters and brother, born not in a bed, but in purification. In this lies the logic of their power. They are the children of the refusal to be stained. The river widened. The birds returned to their proper noise. Izanagi looked at the trio with a satisfaction that did not erase the grief but made it bearable. He had lost one and gained three, and the arithmetic was not cruel. He named their realms with the firm voice of a sovereign who had built the fields and knows how to distribute them. Amaterasu would ascend to Tokomogara and rule the expanse where clouds learn their shapes. Tsukuyomi would keep count of the nights and look after the quiet economy of tides and tempers. Susanoo would take charge of the seas, the storms, and everything that tests the strength of ships and the humility of sailors. The Chronicles of Purification list many more kami born of that rite. A whole court of thresholds and turns. There was a goddess for crossing rivers and a god for removing impurities at the edge of the village. There were guardians of drains and guardians of ditches, powers blessing the humblest of boundaries. This theology of edges is one of the deep colors of the old faith. The sacred is discovered not only in the heights, but in the careful maintenance of seams. When a road leaves the forest, there is a god watching that step. When a child passes from fever to health, there is a god registering the change with a nod. Izanagi stood in the flow of these entities and knew that the world was cleansed and reset. In this purity was sorrow. Purity does not erase the imprint left by love. It does not smooth the bed where it had lain, nor level the stone against which a hand had pressed. Izanagi carried the outline of his grief like a mark carved on wood. This mark would be read by those who came after. It would be retold. It would be the reason why fathers stand with stern faces on the threshold, while mothers teach children that food taken from another's table is chains. The first chapter in any world is a chapter of separations. Heaven separates from earth so each can become the best in itself. A river separates from the sea so that tastes differ and migrations make sense. Life separates from death, and then must live with the knowledge that this barrier is both true and thin. The stone in Yomi is both a door and a wall. The spear that stirred the first island is both a bridge and a boundary. Gods who know all this tread carefully. Gods who forget it learn from their bruises. The rest listen to their stories and try to extract a rule for their small lives. All this was inscribed in the fibers of the world. When the first island solidified beneath the falling drops from the precious spear, the palace in the center of Onogoro still stands in the imagination of the faithful. Its pillar towers like a phrase that never ends. The names of the 8 great islands are still pronounced as if each is a bead, worn by years of use. The tale of the fire child still sounds at hearts that sometimes forget mercy. The story of the boulder stuck in the maw of the earth is still whispered when saying goodbye to those who will not return. From the riverbank where the father found 3 sudden fires on the surface of the water, the world leaned forward to its next tale. It leaned toward the brothers and sister whose quarrels and reconciliations would weave a net strong enough to hold a nation. It leaned toward the dragon whose tails would be severed, and to the sword that would pass from hand to hand like a promise. It leaned toward the fields that would glow with rice, and to the shrines that would cleanse the air with cedar and silk. The first breath was taken. The second was approaching. The book was opened by the point of the spear, and the pillar held the page against the wind. Sorrow is a teacher with a dark lamp. He did not forget Yomi, but neither did he curse it. In the everyday language of the sanctuaries, death is not evil. It is heavy. It leaves stains. It requires washings and recitations, and then life can resume. Izanagi stepped out of the river, shook his hair, and felt the last weight slide away like a shawl. He ordered a sanctuary to be erected to the peach that turned back his pursuers, a sign of gratitude for the sweetness that saves. He ordered rites to be performed for the spirits rising from the clothes and tools. which teach even the immortals to treat possessions with respect. Then he turned his attention to the future, which now bore the faces of the three young gods. Amaterasu went on high. The tales say she took with her a mirror, in which the world learns to recognize itself. And they say that when she sits, it is upon a white seat that forgets not a single vow. She brought light, which is not only radiance, but also the discipline of warmth. Under her gaze, rice remembers bounty, and cranes find the patience to stand in the snow in snowy lines, as in a poem. In time, her court would become complex, and her quarrels would cause comedies and crises in equal measure. But in this first moment, she was only purpose embodied. Tsukuyomi moved by a different path. He does not climb in radiance, he strides. He is the arithmetic of the sea's surface and the poet of frost. In his company, fishermen learn which nights speak kindly and which do not. Lovers learn when to believe messages carved in silver, and farmers learn to sing the names of the months as if they were family. He is a quieter glory than his sister, and quiet glories have a tendency to last a long time. Susanoo lingered by the shore, restless in victory. There are spirits born of purification who immediately seek a new stain to scrub away. He looked at horizons and saw forms that needed to be wrestled with. His temper set the first bout of distant thunder in a rhythm that military bands would remember. He was not evil. He was a wind in need of a harness, and a wave in need of a coastline. The harness and coastline would come. Izanagi, who began the world with a spear and set its balances with a stone, walked away from the Tachibana with newfound powers at his back. He did not return to the pillar on Onogoro. The page had turned. In a mythical era, turning a page is a labor with which rivers and mountains must agree. They agreed. The council of the first gods nodded like old trees. The stuff that had seen caves and sorrow allowed itself once more to be merely a stick. From that day, the shape of the sky gained meaning. The sun ruled as a person, not as a lamp. The moon counted as a mind, not as a coin. The sea learned its griefs and its gifts from a god who matched it breath for breath. Daily rites of purification took root in memory, so that every household could echo the Tachibana River and keep the world ready to receive blessing. The terrible arithmetic announced at the boundary stone came into force. Every day, the houses of completion opened their doors to 1,000. Every day, 1,500 doors swung wide in the houses of beginning. Numbers do not comfort the morning, but they feed the fields. A people can live on this surplus. Priests would later stand at the bends of rivers and sing the names of the many who rose from that first washing. They would sweep the thresholds of sanctuaries with brooms that knew the old songs. Women would tie cords to branches and ask that the defilement of their houses be carried downstream to forgotten places. Men would press their foreheads to stones that look the way law feels. Children would learn to bow to mirrors and their own reflections. All these customs are ripples from a single action. A husband went to retrieve a wife from a land that never returns its guests. He failed. He set a stone where a door should be. He washed. 3 entities rose that would bind the following chapters together. Thus, the stage is set for the quarrels and reconciliations of light, for the long conversations of day and night, and for the dangerous kindness of storms. The spear performed its work. The stone performed its work. The river performed its work. The rest belongs to that trinity that stood, radiant and wet, on the shore while their father shook the last drops from his hair and pointed them toward where to sit. At the beginning of their reign, the 3 noble children did not yet know how sharp family feeling could be. The orders were clear. Amaterasu held the high plane, bearing the labors of the day upon her brow. Tsukuyomi kept the silver count of the night. Susanoo strode along the borders of sea and weather. This clarity was a map, but maps do not strip the heart of its wildness. The sun had the serenity of a lawful place. The moon had the patience of numbers. The storm had the aching pain of unfinished grief. For Susanoo carried within him a wound named after his dead mother, and it tugged at his temper like a tide tugs at a boat. Tsukuyomi was the first to lose balance. Amaterasu appointed him to attend a banquet given by the goddess of food, called Yukimochi in the old songs. She desired to honor the heavenly court and the earthly realm with a feast that gathered the flavors of all directions. She turned to the sea and exhaled fish already seasoned by waves. She turned to the mountains and released game flavored with the herbs of the upper slopes. She looked at the rice fields and filled bowls with grain steamed in its own aroma. Cooking is a sacred art, and in those early days, it was pure wonder. Tsukuyomi watched the goddess work and felt disgust instead of awe, for he saw that the gifts came from places that would later be hidden by kitchens. He judged her as defiled and, overcome by a proud fastidiousness, killed the very hostess who had set the table. Thus ends one of the worst dinners in myth. Amaterasu learned of this deed, and her sorrow sharpened into a sentence. She called the act shameful and forbade Tsukuyomi from ever appearing before her again. From this decree comes the custom whereby the sun and moon do not visit the same sky. Day and night diverge like estranged relatives, exchanging messages only through the changing of seasons. In some retellings, the goddess of food does not remain dead. From the places where her body fell, the blessings of the field silk, millet, oxen, and horses arose. If so, this is yet another example of how old stories weave sadness into the harvest. The stain on Tsukuyomi's name remained. He retired to the realm defined by his office and became the lord of measured distance. All this time, Susanoo raged. He wept and rampaged for his mother, who had gone to the world of the dead. He churned the seas, uprooted trees, and made even the brave gods of the high plain hide stones in their sleeves, and look anxiously at the sky. Finally, their father, Izanagi, who had established the balance of births and deaths and washed the underworld from his skin, ordered Susanoo to leave heaven. The command broke from lips that did not distribute idle orders. Susanoo had to go and accept his role in the lands below. Before leaving, he vowed that he would say goodbye to his sister and prove that his intentions were not poisoned. Amaterasu is a ruler who knows the price of mistakes. When news came that her rebellious brother was ascending to the high plane, she prepared for trouble. She braided her hair with all the rigor of authority and armed herself with the regalia of her office. She built a court and met him with a vigilance that looked like mercy. Susanoo declared he did not wish to displace her or destroy the halls. She did not believe him. Then he asked for an ordeal that would show the truth of his heart. "Let each of us create children from the regalia of the other," he said, "and the nature of these children shall witness the purity of our thoughts." It was a strange contest. Amaterasu took Susanoo's sword and, with ritual precision, broke it into pieces, washing those shards with words. From the breath that rose over that washing, 3 goddesses appeared, whose dignity shone like the lines separating day from night. Susanoo, in turn, took the string of Magatama beads hanging on Amaterasu's breast, crushed them with his teeth into a mist, and spat it out. From that mist rose 5 male gods with proud brows and the wildness of firstborns. Susanoo claimed victory not once, but twice. First, he proclaimed that the 5 boys belonged to him and that their strength proved his sincerity. Then Amaterasu countered. Since the boys came from her jewels, they were hers, and the 3 maidens were born from his sword, so they belonged to him. When she delivered this summary, he cried out again, "Triumph!" For the 3 maidens were each worth a whole kingdom, and they originated from his property. In truth, neither claim mattered for what happened next, for the contest kindled heat in his blood, and victory made it boil. He ran across her fields and destroyed the embankments holding the water. He tore up the furrows with the joy of a boy gone too far. He defiled the pure halls where fine fabric is stretched and beaten to a luster, as if he could not bear the thought of order maintained by rhythm. The last and worst of all was that he took a heavenly piebald horse, skinned it, and hurled the carcass through the roof of the chambers, where the women of the sun goddess were weaving. The sacred craft was interrupted, and one maiden died with a shuttle in her hand. This deed was a desecration. It was a wound to the house of heaven, and a blow to the art that creates garments for kings and gods. Even those who love the storm god turn their eyes away. There is a moment when a queen refuses to accept blows any longer. Amaterasu left the court. She slipped away from the outrage and went to a mountain gorge where a cave opened like a mouth. She entered this void, closed the stone door against the world, and sat in its black throat. She was not sulking. She withdrew herself from a creation that had forgotten how to deserve light. The departure of the sun is not a metaphor in the language of gods. The day ended, crops withered and died. Wolves gained courage. Creatures that hide by nature learned a new audacity and began to peer into the very doors of houses. The heavens were deprived of their lamp, and despair settled like a second night. The gathering of gods that followed is one of the most beloved councils in all mythology. They came from distant corners, powers that usually do not leave their provinces, and filled the riverbanks beneath the cave's mouth. There were blacksmiths there whose anvils do not call. There were jewelers whose hands hum when touching stone. There were singers and dancers whose feet remember the world before it even became a world. The weight of the catastrophe awoke a collective wit in them. They spoke until their breath turned into a light breeze, and decided that laughter could do what rage could not. The plan required 3 gifts and a brilliant performance. First, they asked the master smiths to forge a mirror wider than the belly of a drummer disc, so polished it could hold the sky without a single ripple. Ishikori Dome is the name sometimes given to the deity who sculpts stone, and it was by this hand that the mirror was created. Second, they asked a jewelry maker, named Tamanoyo in ancient tales, to string a thread of curved stones, green as wet pine and red as burning silk. These would be hung to please the eye of a goddess, who was never indifferent to the kindness of beauty. Third, they gathered roosters with their proud combs and made them crow tirelessly, so that the sound of morning would be present at the entrance to the night. Then they cleared a space and overturned a vat to make a stage, upon which ascended a Nozu, the goddess of dawn, dance, and shameless laughter. She was small and strong, with a voice capable of ringing in the mountains. She stomped on the vats, so that the wood barked like a seal. She cracked jokes with the directness of a festival square. She revealed her robes with hints and rolled her hips, in a language that remembers where life begins. The other gods hooted, clapped, and shouted approvals, as if a bountiful harvest were being measured into baskets. The valley filled with a sound so bright that even sorrow sat up and listened. Inside the cave, Amaterasu felt the vibration of joy and frowned. She had left a world that had forgotten seriousness. Why then were they celebrating at the very doors of night? She shouted, asking what cause for delight could possibly exist, while the fields withered and the courts were plunged into darkness. Outside, a Nozoom announced that they had found a goddess more magnificent than the sun and new light, whose face shone with a freshness that eclipsed any other day. Pride and curiosity touched a place in Amaterasu that no sorrow can seal forever. She cracked open the stone door and peered out. They had hung a long string of jewels on a tree adorned with white cloth and green leaves. They had set an enormous mirror at an angle. As Amaterasu reached toward the noise and the claims, she saw a radiant figure shining at the entrance to the cave. She did not know it was herself. Gods are just as vulnerable as we are to the shock of their own reflection. She stepped closer, and the face in the mirror grew brighter and moved toward her. At that moment, a mighty god named Aino Tojiko leapt forward, seized her by the wrist, and pulled her into the open space. The others slammed the stone door shut and stretched a heavy rope across it. A sacred rope, knotted so that even a goddess would hesitate to cross it. Light spilled across the valley like spilled milk. The gods rejoiced, and at last, the cries of the roosters once again matched the world. Relief raced through all levels of being. The rice lifted its young shoots. The carp turned on their sides, flashing gold. Even the stones smiled in their slow rhythm. Priests of later ages would recreate Izum's frantic dance in solemn theaters and village squares. For it is right to laugh at the memory of a catastrophe overcome by wit. As for Susanoo, the court exacted a fine from him. His hair was shorn, his nails were torn out. Finally, he was banished from heaven and sent to the land of Izumo under a law that was no longer subject to debate. He left like a storm that had spent itself over the mountains, heading toward the lands in search of a new reason for dispute. It is worth lingering on the symbols gathered at the cave. The mirror would become one of the treasures by which a ruler is recognized. It is a reminder that good governance must be reflective, not blind, but it requires a face capable of seeing itself and being corrected. The string of jewels remembers the first economy of worship, and the sweetness by which the heart is directed toward attention. The rope stretched across the cave entrance is the ancestor of every sacred boundary, drawn at shrines. A reminder that there are thresholds one should cross only in the right frame of mind. Uzume's dance lives wherever a rite understands that the sacred is not only stone. Joy is a ritual just as binding as sorrow. The quarrel between brother and sister did not end with the opening of the cave. It found new chapters, new wounds, and new healings. And yet, this episode defined the great rhythm in which mortals live. Light can be lost and found. It can hide, and it can be enticed out with laughter and tact. The sun can be called by a mirror, lured by jewels, and invited by songs that make even the most sober shift their shoulders. In the most ancient embers of this story, the community resolved a divine crisis not with spears or censures, but with theater. This choice tells you what kind of people these gods created. Tsukuyomi took his place in the night sky and kept his distance. He was not invited to the dance, and he would not have come if he were. He learned to turn his face, hide it, and return again, teaching human bodies when to harvest and when to wait, when to fish and when to sleep. He learned to loosen his grip on insults and let the cold do the rest. The old resentment remained, and yet, under his cool arithmetic, the world found a kinder rhythm. Amaterasu returned to the high plane as a companion the world had not known before. It was not a lover and not a guardian, it was the knowledge that even the brightest must be invited. The mirror in her palace caught her gaze during quiet afternoon hours and showed her a face, not unlike the one at the cave in trance, except, perhaps, a little wiser. The court resumed its rituals. Fabric was woven again in halls that had been purified, and the songs of the looms sounded like spring rain. Offerings were made to the goddess of food in her new forms fall from her slain body. The gifts of agriculture continued to arrive. Tsukuyomi's mistake did not prevent the earth from being generous. Susanoo descended into Izumo, unaware of the monster and the maiden who would soon change his history and his temper. His exile was not so much a defeat as the turning of a page. The seas called to him with voices he always heard in his skull and teeth. He brought with him an energy that was not evil but required contest and prudent limits. He would find those limits in a valley where the river runs like a wet sword, and in a house where old people mourn their last child. But that is the next part. For now, remember the cave and the laughter, and the moments the goddess forgot her face and reached out to touch it. Remember the blacksmith who created a sun from stone, and the jeweler who wove a river into a thread, and the dancers who returned light to the world with the sincere mischief of joy. Remember also the lesson hidden inside the scandal. In the court, there must be room for both dignity and play, or the sun will grow weary and go to sit alone in the darkness. This is not a moral. These are the landmarks by which a people rule. Exile does not tame the wind, it redirects it. When the court of the high plain shorn Susanoo's nails, tempered the rage in his hair, and sent him down, the sea immediately took possession of him. He fell upon the green provinces of the mortal world like a squall with swift intent, and the smell of salt in his cloak. The decree that banished him did not strip him of his nature. It gave the earth a chance to nurture it. The waves along the coast of Izumo met him with the booming greeting that stones give to the surf, and the god of storm and sea stepped ashore in a land of reeds, wide rivers, and mountain peaks. Izumo is a place where waters gather and then rush to the sea. The heavens hang close there, and the mists are not shy. It suited him. He walked inland along a river that was white at the edges and brown in the middle, following it until he heard human voices thick with sorrow. The sound came from a low-slung house pressed against a bank that had seen floods. There, an old man, and an old woman were trying to convince their hands not to tremble. Between them sat a girl whose face wore the calm of those who have watched hope leave house after house and have learned not to call it by name. Susanoo asked the reason for their tears. The old man looked up and saw a figure whose eyes held broken weather and sudden sunlight. He bowed until the floor met his forehead and said his name was Ashinazuchi. His wife's was Tenazuchi, and their daughter's was Kushinada. Once they had 8 daughters. Every year a monster came down from the mountain range and took one, and this debt had been paid 7 times. The night would come when the beast would take the last. There was no cliff to throw oneself from that would be a sure defense. There was no temple strong enough to hide the beating of a heart. And so they wept and waited for a door that has no hinges. Susanoo asked the name of the valley and learned it was a land called Koshi, a name breathing of old maps. He asked about their origin and discovered they traced their lineage to the family of the food goddess, once offended by the moon. Through such connections, fate sets its traps and its salvations. He gave the parents his name and announced that if they gave the girl to him as a wife, he would carve the calamity out of their history. The old man swore, by all the gods listening, that he would seal the marriage with gratitude, as firmly as with law. The storm god nodded once, and at that nod, the rafters remembered how to stand straight. Kushinada was the color of rice flowers when the wind passes through them. About such women, singers try to speak simply. Susanoo knew that a hero raising a sword over a monster must first place the beloved outside the wide sweep of that sword. He touched her hair, turned her into a delicate comb, and inserted this comb into his hair by his ear, so that her voice could whisper counsel and her presence could keep his heart firm. He went outside, looked upriver toward the mountain pass, and felt a great animal presence turning its many heads toward the valley. The monster was called Yamato no Orochi. Old storytellers say it had 8 heads and 8 tails, and a body so vast it sprawled over 8 hills and 8 valleys, as if a mountain range were trying to learn to riff. Its eyes were red, like wine that had looked at a brazier too long. Fir trees grew on its back, as if it had been a ridge since the very dawn of stones. Its belly oozed with sores through which the poison of ancient metals dripped. The river foamed at its sides when it took a breath. This was not a neat dragon. This was a memory of chaos, clothed in scales. Susanoo did not rush to attack. He had learned in the heavens that his temper makes mistakes when he hurries. He asked for a barrel, then another, until he had prepared 8 large vats. He told the old man to brew rice wine so strong that its scent tugged at the roots of the tongue. He and the parents built a fence of sturdy posts, and in the fence, they made 8 gates. Behind each gate, they placed a vat of the fierce drink. They sealed the fence as carefully as a priest seals a letter. Then the storm god stepped back and placed his hand on the hilt of a sword that knew it would soon learn its best song. Even monsters have habits. When the appointed evening lowered its cold finger along the river, Orochi descended from the pass with a movement like a slow-moving landslide. Each head tasted the air, found the sweetness of the wine, and pushed through toward a gate. The fence held their heads bowed. They drank. The sake was a lake to them, and they plunged their throats into it until the vats were empty. Their tongues hung from their maws, and the tips of their tails twitched in the foolish joy of drunkards. Their eyelids closed. The mountain fell asleep. Susanoo moved this time. He did not roar. He passed through the fence with the composure of a man who has lit the last lamp in a temple, and is checking the locks. He brought his blade down on one neck, then another. Clean work without posturing, and the heads rolled away like hailstones that cannot melt. He waded through blood that flowed black in the night and silver in the moonlight, and with every strike, the power of the storm found a better use than rage. He hacked the body into pieces so that it would never knit together or rise again. The earth shuddered. The river boiled with the hot disorder that follows justice executed truly. When he reached the great tail, he struck and felt a jolt that told him metal had kissed metal. He frowned, struck again, and found within the tail a blade of such fineness that it took even the god's breath away. This was not a thing created in any forge known to him. It carried within it the memory of clouds that gather and the clear mind that disperses them. They called it Ain-no-Murakumo-Tsurugi, the heavenly sword of gathering clouds. Later, it would be called Kusonogi, the grass cutter, for a deed yet to be done. But that song belonged to another era. Susanoo lifted the sword and realized that sometimes a beast dies, not only to end hunger, but to release a gift. He cleansed the blade and lifted it to the night. Then, because even the proud know when they owe their sister a gesture of atonement, he sent the sword to Amaterasu on the high plain. Accept this, the message read. Let it be a sign that your brother has learned at least one way to do the work of order. In later centuries, people would say that this blade, the mirror, and the jewel were the three objects by which a ruler is recognized. In this first moment, it was simply a beautiful weapon, salvaged from the carcass and given upward with a bow. Having destroyed the serpent, Susanoo returned to the house by the river and removed the comb from his hair. Kushinoda stood in repose, like a kept vow. He married her with words that remembered that tenderness is also a strength, and they built a house in Suga, in Izumo, where the air is as clear as water at the foot of a cedar. There, they say, the storm god uttered the first poem in the language of verse comparing the building of a house to the gentle encircling of a bride, a verse coming to a rest that is almost like a sigh of relief. Poetry and the sword often sit side by side in the biographies of gods and men. Susanoo did not become a tame spirit. He remained as changeable as light on a wave, and yet the valley learned that his path could be attuned to the safety of the fields. He taught people to dig channels that allow floods to flow where they must. He reminded them to lash roofs to frames. He stood between sea fury and house fire and called each by its name. Once, he had torn up dikes in a fit of reckless victory. Now he told boys to brace their feet at the base of a wall and check it as a sailor checks a rope with hands and hearing. He entered into a lineage that held both shrines and hearths. Kushinoda brought into the house a reverence that softened the edges of his temper. From time to time, he went down to the shore, stood with the tide in his eyes, and then returned carrying fish whose scales looked like small coins of the sunrise. The old couple lived out their years with a grandson on each knee and a settled feeling that the mountain pass above the river no longer held a moor opening into their kitchen. In this chapter, it is worth lingering on the mastery that saved the girl in the valley. The ancient texts insist on the number 8, as if the very rhythm of that number was protective. 8 heads, 8 tails, 8 gates, 8 vats. The tale bears the taste of a spoken spell. Here are heard echoes of how communities build layered defenses. 1 gate can be broken. 8 gates divide the burden of danger. A monster might resist a cup of wine. 8 vats make it forget hunger in a flood of sweetness. Susanoo did not fight nature with rough force. He fed one appetite to lull another, and then brought the sword to a neck that no longer danced. The story honors cunning and preparation as much as it honors strength. There is also the matter of the hidden sword. Weapons inside monsters occur in many traditions, like hearts in boxes and names in X. Here, the discovery carries a double meaning. First, it proclaims that in the depths of chaos, there may be a gift belonging to order, a sign forged in secret that only the victor can release. Second, it shows the god at his best, passing this gift on instead of keeping it for himself to boast before the village. The sword that a mortal hero will one day draw belongs to the sun before it belongs to kings. Susanoo's house in Suga became a place of mentorship. Here, elders who had seen the river turn red told boys that rage is a poor engineer. Here, women who remembered the one who was once a comb taught girls. A calm head is no less valuable than broad shoulders. The god who had frightened the heavens learned to sleep without wrinkles on his face, and to wake with relaxed fingers. He did not cease to be a storm. He learned to be a storm that understands the difference between a field and a fortress. However, the story of Izumo does not end with a wedding, a poem, and a buried legend. The land gives birth to leaders among its kami, just as it grows moss on stones. From Susanoo's house, a descendant was to emerge who would subdue the central plains and turn chaos into law. This work fell upon the shoulders of a god whose name means Master of the Great Land Okuninushi, the patient builder of roads, creator of medicines, and master of treaties. He would learn kindness from a hare, courage from a trickster, and prudence through trials set by an ancestor who respected a sharp mind. His era would answer the call of the high plane and mark a new transfer of power from the earth to the heavens. Before this tale begins, let us stand for the last time by the fence with 8 gates and listen to the river gliding past, the remains of what once considered itself eternal. If you listen closely, you can still feel the sweetness in the silt and the iron in the weeds. The air of Izumo holds the memory of the night when laughter left the world and then returned, and of a later night when something even darker descended from the mountain and never went back. It is for such nights that gods are allowed to be difficult, so that when the moment comes, that difficulty turns into salvation. From the high plain, the sun watched as familiar peace returned to the river valley and felt approval. Her brother had begun to find a better use for his noise. In the palace, the sword rested on a stand of silent wood. In the garden, the bride studied the paths of her new home. On the pass, silence reigned where the many-headed creature once lay. The story now passes from the storm to the earth, from the flash of the blade to the patience of rule. Islands survive thanks to the patience of their creators. After the serpent was vanquished and the Izumo River flowed clean, the work of shaping the country passed into hands that preferred craft to clamor. Susanoo taught the valley a lesson of thunder and gave a song of love. What the land required next was a steward who would lay roads where there were only trails, entice medicine from bitter herbs, and teach spirits and humans to share one home. This steward came from the lineage of the storm. He is remembered by a name that is both a title and a destiny, Master of the Great Land Okuninushi. He did not start as the tallest tree in the grove. He was the youngest among many brothers so numerous that storytellers lose count, and call them the 80. These were proud hunters and warriors who spoke of marriage as if it were a game of spears. Their goal was the princess of the Inaba region, a woman of sharp mind and with eyes like clear river water. Her name was Yagami Haim. The 80 brothers set out to woo her, with the manner of men confident that the door of the heart opens from noise. Okuninushi walked behind them like a servant, burdened with their bundles, and his shoulders bore the marks from the straps. There is a special form of greatness that walks at the end of the line and learns to see what the leaders miss. On the way, they met a white hare in terrible pain. The sea folk had stripped its skin with a cruel joke, and the creature trembled on the sand, which stung it with every breath. The elder brothers laughed at the animal and gave false advice, which in itself is a form of malice. They told the hare to bathe in the salty surf and lie in the wind. The poor animal did as it was told, and its agony flared up like fire in dry brush. Then the last passerby set his burden on the ground and knelt. Okuninushi spoke as one speaks to children and sufferers. First, wash in fresh water, he said. Then lie on a bed of soft reeds, and the pollen will become a balm for you. The hare did so, and the simple kindness of water and pollen healed it. The creature became whole again and blessed the man who had noticed it, predicting that the princess of Inaba would not choose a groom who mocks pain. She would choose the one who stooped to help the hare. And so it happened. Yagami Haim held her own court. She saw the truth through the decorations and boasting, and named the youngest brother her husband. The 80 brothers flared with insult, and that flash was dangerous. Wounded pride bleeds with rage. They tried to kill their brother with a treachery that would suit ogres. They lured him into a fire trap and left him as ash on the wind. In one tradition, it was the mother who found a way to bring him back. In another, the gods of healing emerged from groves and mountains and returned him to life, with the help of herbs and breath. Whatever the path, the boy who lifted the hare to mercy was lifted in turn by hands that cared for him. He rose with scars that would later be read as sacred scripture. The elder brothers tried again, and the world grew tired of their malice. The mother who saved her youngest son convinced him to flee to the very root of the earth, where Susanoo kept house beneath the rolls of thunder. If you want to live, she said, Go down and seek the Father of Storms. Pass his trials. Earn his favor. Receive the weapon that envious king cannot turn against you. Okuninishi obeyed. For obedience to wise counsel is a form of courage that ballads do not always sing loud enough. The way to the underworld realm led through valleys where the wind smelled of iron, and through halls illuminated by a radiance that seemed to come from within the stones. There, in the fortress of strange hospitality, he met Susanu's daughter, named Suserihaim. She saw in him what he himself did not yet suspect. A steady flame that cooks food without charring it. Love found its verdict in their first glance. Susanu appeared with a laugh like the surf beneath a cliff, and stared at the visitor, who wished to take his child as a wife. The old storm does not give consent to anyone without a trial. If you want to be kin, he said, spend this night in the hall where the snakes sleep. The snakes were unkind. The youth went into the hall, and Suserihaim slipped him a scarf with a protective charm. When the snakes raised their heads, he wrapped himself in this gift, and the bite could not find his skin. Other trials followed, each tasting like a practical lesson. To survive in a room with centipedes, whose carapaces clattered against one another. To escape a chamber full of bees, who could scent fear with an instinct for truth. To sleep in a granary made of things that wake up if you look at them the wrong way. In each instance, the daughter provided the wisdom that balanced vigilance. She taught him that a thread can be a leash for calamity, that a melody can divert rage, and that a grain of patience is a mountain in disguise. Finally, Susanu arranged the harshest trial of all. He commanded the youth to bind his hair in a knot and fasten it with a bow, then sent him into an open field and set the grass on fire around him. The flames drew a circle and began to tighten. Okuninishi did not thrash in the fire, nor plead with the heavens. He remembered an old story, that a blade can cut grass when it must. He carved a path where the ring was weakest and slipped away from the heat that tried to seal his final breath. There are many lessons here, and one is simple. A trap will not hold a mind that knows how to find the seams. Satisfied or at least tempered by respect, Susanu tested the youth one last time. He hung the great sword, which had once severed the serpent, above the marriage bed, as if reminding all parties that a god retains his sharpness even in domestic bliss. This gesture was a rough blessing in the guise of a warning. Then he gave his daughter to the survivor with a look that said, care for what I love, and on a good day, I may not forget to express approval. From the store of his power, he offered words that can bind and words that can set free. The young couple left the underground halls and rose once more into the lands of light, carrying with them trophies less visible than blades. They had patience, the habit of listening, and the knowledge that a home survives when its guardians laugh before anger takes the floor. Returning to the river world, Okuninishi set about his great labor. In the ancient tongue, this is called creating the land. This phrase means something more than walls and fields. It is the art by which spirits and mortals learn to share a single calendar. He became the one to whom local gods brought their disputes. He learned the names of the marshes and the temper of the winds. He taught healing that went beyond travelers' recipes and became a set of prayers and instructions. A night fever yields to water taken with a charm from the seventh leaf of a stalk growing, where cranes sleep. The bite of an evil spirit retreats before smoke passed thrice through a ring of reed, and thrice through a ring of willow. These details make historians frown and grandfathers smile. A nation is stitched together from such fragments. In this labor, he found a companion as strange as legend allows. The figure was knee-high, but in manner a grown man, with a cunning eye and a swift hand. His name was Sukunabikona, the little master, and he came ashore one day on a stalk that floated like a boat. Some say he slipped from the sleeve of a god who was cursing the gates. Others say he was born from a seed cast aside by a careless giant. Be that as it may, he met Okuninishi with the audacity of one who knows he will be loved by all before the sun sets. Together they swept away diseases and taught the brewing of potions that eased bone pain and soothed childbirth. They taught farmers the courtesy by which a field pays its keeper. They drove terrible pests from granaries with rituals that look like jokes but are not. They set boundary stones understood by spirits and taught songs to be sung when asking a hill to share its road. For a time, the pair was a comedy of mismatched sizes and perfect purpose. Then, as happens with strange friends, the little master said goodbye and leaped across the sea to dwell where distance forbids visits. Okuninushi watched the sparkling trail of his departure and returned to his affairs with the silence that follows the end of a beautiful chapter. By this time, the 80 brothers had exhausted their malice. Some fell victim to their own schemes. Others dissolved into obscurity, which was a better fate than they deserved. The master of the great land stood on the harvest plain and saw that the gods of the hills no longer descended at night to ruin the crops. Children played, mimicking his gait, which is exactly how a people decides what a hero looks like. The temples rising under his gaze looked east and west with that correctness that made the weather be polite. The first markets formed on the fringes of festivities and grew into gatherings where news found legs. It was not a golden age, for such do not exist, but it was that sturdy time when gold learns to alloy with patience. Order in one realm attracts the attention of another. On the high plain, the sun returned to her duties, and the court rebuilt what the storm had destroyed. From that height, Amaterasu and her council looked down and saw a land ready for the next phase. They had long carried a covenant. The lineage of the high plain would one day take under its care the reed plain below. The pact between worlds required a conclusion. The decision was this: to ask for a gift, and then send proof that refusal would be unwise. Such is the way of many treaties. Before force words, after words, the right messenger with the right hands. Messengers came and went. One of them, dubbed the flash of a sword in human form, descended past the faces of gods and mountain defiles, and stood before Okuninushi to lay out the request with a courtesy sharpened by destiny. The master of the great land did not reach for his blade. He summoned his sons. First came Koto Shiranushi, the god of harbors and luck. Who knows that a ship must give consent to being lucky? He listened briefly, and without reluctance. He agreed. He took his boat and his hook and retired to quiet places, and the sea made room for his keel, as a host makes room for a guest whose common sense is known to all. The second son was Takemi no Kota, a power of arms and proud shoulders, a god whose faith is written in his veins. He descended from the north, where mountains grant people a straightforward temperament. He looked at the messenger, who was the thunder of law-given flesh, and declared that he did not wish to cede a single inch of earth to the sky. When words are powerless, men and gods meet in a struggle. They seized each other by the wrists. Takemi no Kota felt a hand that changed beneath his palm, becoming first ice and then flame. In this metamorphosis, he began to understand that he was not wrestling with a simple courier. He strained and stamped, and felt his own living strength find its equal and superior without any malice. Then he was thrown and pinned to the ground by a pressure that did not wound, but permitted no objection. He rose from the dust with red ears and wounded pride, and left the field not skulking, but not singing songs either. He went to the province of Shinano, where rivers are young, and promised to live by a vow that has the weight of mountains. Leave troubles to those who love them. Okuninushi watched his sons choose their roads and weighed the offer of the heavens against the health of the land he had taught to breathe deeply. He asked for a thing both modest and majestic. If I give the surface and the sunlight to the grandson of the high plain, let me keep for myself the realm that eyes do not see, the hidden part of the world, the space behind the hedge where secrets slumber. Build for me a sanctuary that will honor this service, a house with pillars so high that cranes will take them for a cliff, and a roof so generous that the rain will muffle its noise upon it. Let people remember that the invisible contains as much life as the visible. In return, I will give the open country to the new order and bless its plows. The deal suited both sides. The messenger nodded, and the earth answered with a tremor of consent, not fear. The craftsmen gathered with that zeal that follows an order worthy of a song. They felled cedar and cypress with prayers, asking the trees to go willingly. They hewed beams that remembered the mountain even as they learned to be a roof. They erected a ladder, like a soft stepladder for the gods. They scattered white gravel like fallen, and never swept starlight. The sanctuary at Izumo rose and spread its eaves like a sheltering wing. In the seasons of festivals, many gods visit it, and it seems there are more rooms in the air there than the eye can count. For Okuninishi, this place became both a palace and a promise. In this abode, he took his place as the patron of good marriages, the builder of nations, and the keeper of the hidden realm where thought becomes a thing. When the sanctuary was consecrated, the master of the great land set aside the royal name tied to the surface of affairs. He did not die. He turned. He entered the polite shadows and took upon himself the care of the world living behind the curtain. In songs, he is called the Great Spirit of the invisible land. If you whisper at a crossroads and your whisper is not in vain, it is his service that makes the whisper worth the breath. If a plan works because you did not forget to be kind at the start, someone might say he walked beside you that day and adjusted your elbow at the right moment. Thus the land passed from the governance of a patient creator to the care of a lineage that would one day send a prince from the clouds. This transfer was not a sack thrown into a cart. It was a ceremony conducted by mature souls. The land kept its household gods. The sky set its seal. The story that began with a spear stirring the sea now prepared to meet a foot descending from the heavens. First would come the grandson, bearing the mirror, the sword, and the jewel. Then the hunter who would marry the bloom and reject the rock, and thereby teach every mortal that beauty often comes with brevity. After that the boy who would lose a hook and in that loss find a dragon's palace, a princess, and a story. Finally, this story would put on a crown, find a capital, and a calendar. For a moment, imagine the great roof at Izumo, shining after the rain. A rope as thick as a river hangs over the entrance and absorbs even stubborn impurity. Inside, pillars rise like quiet trees, and the air is patient. The master of the great land is there invisible, but not absent. Just as the hearth is always in the house, even when no fire burns in it. In the fields outside the temple, the ditches follow the lines he taught. And in the market, a woman sells potions that soothe a cough, because long ago a little master and his tall friend compared leaves and found a composition that helped. The deal holds. The hills offer wandering fires, and the courts offer law. And between them walk mortals, greeting gates, stones, and streams with small gestures of respect that cost nothing but save the world. There is a way in which history turns. When heaven decides to step upon the earth, it does not fall like a stone nor drift like a leaf. It descends with ceremony, like a great lantern lowered into a hole from which every speck of dust has been swept. From the high plain, the sun goddess looked down upon the reed plain below and saw a land ordered by patience and treaties, a country that had learned the language of ditches and the courtesy of shrines. The time had come to join heaven to soil with a living bridge, not a rope or a cloud, but a person who would carry the weight of daylight in their bones. Her first thought was not of her grandson. In the old law, the sun goddess turned to her son, called the master of the broad heavens, and asked him to descend to rule. He looked upon the earth and hesitated, for he knew that the work of a founder is a long wheel of stale bread, and he wanted to be certain the table was set. In his stead, messengers tried the path, and one lost himself in the pleasures of the lower world, seduced by a bride and lulled by the soft lies of comfort, until an arrow returned to him the truth that such forgetfulness is fatal. The lesson was learned. Heaven must send not a wonder, but an offspring with a mandate so bright as to blind all doubt. Thus the choice fell upon the sun goddess' grandson, a young god named Ninigi. He was given a retinue of deities to guide, guard, and advise him, for even a divine prince benefits from counsel and roads traveled by others. The path lay across cloudy ledges toward the mountains of the south, where the cedar takes root with confidence. This descent was called the advent of the heavenly grandson, and it became the hinge upon which the age of gods turned toward the world of men. Before his departure, his grandmother entrusted to his care 3 objects whose meaning is older than thrones. The first was a mirror, forged so perfectly that light rests upon it like water in a still bowl. The second was a string of curved stones the color of wine and pine, smooth and heavy with a patient radiance. The third was a sword that once slept inside a serpent and was drawn from the wound by a god, who had finally found the right use for his rage. These were not toys or trinkets. They were pledges. The mirror promised a rule that reflects and deliberates. The jewel promised a bond between rulers and subjects beautiful and unbreakable. The sword promised the courage to cut away that which threatens fields and families. Ninigi stood ready. In his retinue were deities whose names sound like lines of an incantation. There was the goddess who, with her dance, coaxed the dawn from the cave and chased away fear with laughter. There were keepers of rituals who remembered which rice to scatter and which words to speak to invite luck to sit nearby. A mighty god with great hands waited to prop up the way if the mountain passes became stubborn. Together they formed a procession that would fill the heart of any storyteller with the pleasure of a magnificent spectacle. At the edge where heaven becomes a hill, they met a tall and formidable spirit standing at the threshold of the lower world. He is the lord of the great path, and in his name is the squint of a sailor peering into a sunny day. At first, he refused to step aside, for the gods of the threshold are not to be bribed with titles nor blinded by a retinue. The retinue did not draw swords. The dancer of the dawn stepped forward and, as she had done at the cave's entrance, turned necessity into delight. She brought laughter to the feet of the guardian and flattered his pride with praise. That was both daring and true. He smiled, and his stubbornness unraveled like a knot. He led them down a reliable spur into the mountains of Kyushu and stood by. When Ninigi set foot on the peak of pure air, the mountain is called Tokachiyo, and there the prince made camp. The air tasted of cedar, the river, and the beginning of a story that would be told for centuries. He arranged the gifts of heaven that came with him and began the labor of ruling. Ruling in ancient lands is not the barking of commands. It is the slow establishment of correct relationships between fields and floods, between shrines and markets, between old gods and new names. Ninigi brought a tranquility that the hills liked. He did not drive the local spirits from their homes. He asked them to share the calendar. They agreed, because the agreement was paid for with courtesy. Soon came the day when the mountain god of that region sent two daughters to visit the new sovereign. The elder was Iwanaga, the maiden of the rocks, whose presence carried the peace of granite and the stubborn comfort of stone warmed by the sun. The younger was Konohana, the maiden of the blossom, whose stride was the light rhythm of spring and whose smile carried more promise than a field of buds. The father did not simply offer them as one offers horses. He sent both so that the ruler who took them would enjoy a double blessing. Through the rock, he would find longevity. Through the blossom, he would be beautiful and abundant. Ninigi saw the younger first. He loved her instantly. He asked for her hand and did not ask for the elder. The message returned to the mountain lord who, for all his fairness, felt the sting of insult. He sent back a warning wrapped in courtesy. You chose the flower and rejected the rock. Because you refused the elder, your lineage will be beautiful but short-lived. Had you married the elder as well, your lineage would have endured forever, as the mountains endure. Thus the god inscribed mortality into the calendar of kings and ordinary people alike. This tale is harsh, yet within it is hidden a truth. We choose brilliance even knowing it will fade. We are made by this choice no less than by our breath. Ninigi and Konohana were married with rites worthy of a union destined to strengthen the kingdom. Not long did the bride's joy last before rumor cast a stain upon her. She conceived quickly, and her husband felt a small doubt rise within him. Like a fish testing the surface, he wondered if the child within her was of his seed or of some secret lover. Doubt in a ruler is an acid. It corrodes wood, then stone, and then the hand that holds both. Konohana answered the creeping poison with a trial retold and retold by hearts. She built a birthing hut of reeds and entered it when the time came. She told him that if the child within her was not his, then the flames would consume her. She set the hut on fire and sat in the very center, as if seated in the midst of a full moon. The fire eats greedily, and then with a certain grace. Neighbors watched with tightly set faces, and the husband stood with an open mouth that forgot how to close. Smoke came out through the straw in ribbons. When the roof finally collapsed, it fell around her, not on her. She emerged carrying a son, whose skin glowed with the health of blessings. Behind him followed a second son, and in some songs, a third. The boys' names vary in the mouths of inhabitants of different provinces, but their callings are clear. One loved the sea, and the luck of fishing hooks. One loved contests. One loved the mountains and the hunt. The eldest was master of the shore, the second found his fate later in tales that do not delay us here. The youngest bore a name reminiscent of slopes and deer antlers. He's the prince of mountain hunting, and it is he whose story will carry us into oceans, palaces, and encounters with kings wearing scales. Before we follow him, we must see the outlines of the house he left behind. Ninigi ruled from the south with the tranquility given to him along with the mirror. He learned which prayers for harvest were appropriate before planting, and which before threshing. He resolved disputes with a patience that taught people to bring him their strifes before they resorted to fists. He kept the instructions of the threshold god close, and the laughter of the dawn dancer even closer. For there is no court that does not harden when these two are missing. He was not a creator like the master of the great land, who measured roads and marked boundaries for spirits. He was the establisher of a high order. This difference is important. Builders gather together. Rulers hold together. The archipelago required both. The new family grew, and through the children, the gifts of heaven began to weave into human lineages. Kalahana walked through her gardens and watched the falling petals with a new tenderness. She had been denied the sister whose name is Endurance. She did not grieve over this. She taught her sons that the brevity of the blossom makes it sharper. A rice field in perfect ripeness is a note sustained just as long as needed and then released. Marriage does not bring the same joy in its final hour as in its first. And this is not a defeat. It is the music of life. The youngest son, who loved the mountains, quarreled with his elder brother, who loved the tides and shallows. It all began with a request that seemed simple. "Let us exchange tools for a time," said the hunter, "so that I may know the taste of your trade, and you may learn of mine." The fisherman agreed and lent his hook, taking the bow in return. The experiment was a failure. The hunter lost the hook. He searched for it with the zeal of a young priest in a full library and could not find it. He fashioned many hooks and offered them to the elder as an apology. The fisherman did not accept them. He wanted exactly the hook that had been given. The story turned at that moment toward a palace far from the shore, and a princess whose father wears the sea as a mantle. But we shall not rush forward. Ninigi looked upon his sons, weighed their dispute, and kept the peace with a firm hand that closes quarrels without opening them anew. The next day, he sent the youngest to the coast with advice that sounded like common sense, but turned out to be the opening of a new chapter. "Find where that which is lost goes to rest," he said. "Some things lie not on the sand. They lie in the treasuries of kings, living beneath the waves. If you are brave and polite, the sea will find that it is your ally." There is one more episode belonging to the house of Ninigi and concerning all who come after. In later years, men and women looked back and said that the choice of the flower instead of the rock determined the span of human life. Mortals will shed their petals. They will be beautiful and short-lived. This was not only a curse, it was also a gift that made meaning possible. Eternal days pile up like stones and stifle the heart. Measured days teach the heart to choose. Rulers learn from this that a crown is not a ladder to immortality. It is a circle of responsibility that must be given at the proper time, and this giving itself constitutes the essence of its honor. The court's own Ninigi began to take the form that future courts would imitate. There were keepers of purifications who knew the names of the minor gods, who removed defilement from thresholds and hands. There were singers capable of calming a crowd after a sentence, and thereby preventing the drawing of knives. There were moon watchers who counted the nights with precision, and told farmers when to begin planting with a certainty. that calmed the most anxious. There were blacksmiths whose forges produced tools before weapons, and whose hammers were commanded to rest on festival days. Ruling is a choreography. Ninigi learned the steps and taught them to others. Now the tale begins to gather itself for a journey. The youngest son will set out in search of the lost hook, and we shall go with him. He will descend into the halls of the sea, where columns take the form of whale ribs and lanterns are fish that have agreed to stand still and shine. He will find a princess whose beauty is created from water, the movement of water, and the silence after water. He will break a promise and pay for it with a sorrow that belongs not only to him. He will return with a tide jewel capable of flooding the plain, and with a peace that will allow his children to be born into a world where both mountains and shores know their limits. Before he departs, one more look at the mountain and the prince who set his foot there. The heavenly grandson did not conquer the land with spears. He married it. He asked it to show patience to his house and promised patience in return. The sun goddess sent him with a mirror, a jewel, and a sword. The first two he used every day, and the last only when necessity demanded. A kingdom nurtured by reflection, promise, and restrained power is a kingdom that can raise a boy to maturity without teaching him to love cruelty. In quiet hours, the dancers of the dawn rehearsed in the courtyards, their feet whispering the story of the cave, the mirror, and the laughter that calls the light back from voluntary exile. Children in the hills learn the names of the treasures, tracing them in the air with their fingers and pretending to be rulers who need no prodding to do justice. Song gathered around these scenes until the people learned to hum the story of their own founding. In the evenings, the prince sat with his bride and listened to the soft roar of the distant surf and the nearby chirping of crickets. He envied nothing. He waited only for the next true task. The next true task belongs to the son who lost the hook. He is the hunter who will learn the courtesy of the ocean and discover that the heart of the Dragon King is not so different from the heart of a mountain god who loves his daughters. He will hold the tide in his hand and then not forget to let it go. From his lineage, a child will later be born who will turn the journey to the east into the first chapter of human sovereigns. This is the hill we will climb when we reach it. For now the heavenly lantern burns over Tokachiho. The mirror shines on its stand. The jewel waits in silks. The sword sleeps like a promise given to future danger. The prince sits with clean hands. The flower rests in his shadow and smiles, knowing what she gave up and what she made possible. The youngest son lifts his face to the night and scents the salt on the wind. Rivalry begins as a small fold in a shared fabric. In the house of Ninigi, it took the form of two brothers whose talents pulled in different directions. The elder loved the sea and knew its pulse as a harper knows the strings. He is called Hoderi in the old speech, which means the one whose catch piles high on the shore. The younger loved the mountains and the silence of forest trails. His name is Huri, the prince who listens to the leaf and the stag's horn, learning patience from the hillside. Between them lay an affection that could have been a bond, and a pride that could have become a flint. The quarrel began not with an insult, it began with curiosity. "Let us trade for a time," said the younger. "Give me your hook and take my bow. I shall know the sea, and you the hunt." The elder agreed. For brothers before the arrival of wisdom often think that an exchange will bring no harm. Huri took the hook, went down to the water's edge, and prepared the line. He cast it as one casts a question and waited as one waits for an oracle. The line tightened, then went slack, and in the slow theater of trial and error, the hook vanished. Perhaps it caught on a stone. Perhaps a great fish carried it off in a rush. Perhaps the sea decided that a fisherman's tool should not lie in a hunter's hand. Huri searched the shore. He searched the shallows. He made many hooks and offered them with a bowed head. Hoderi refused to be appeased. Only the lost hook would do the very iron forged by the hand that forged it first. This answer, stubborn and simple, sent the young man beneath the waves, into halls where daylight is but a guest. Huri went to his father for advice. Ninigi did not scold. He is of those rulers who know that rebuke does not grow hooks from the water. "Find where lost things are kept," he said. Beneath the sea floor there are palaces, and they have chiefs, courtiers, and treasurers. Do not go as a thief. Go as a petitioner with good manners and a clear voice." The prince bowed, took the advice, and walked along the shore until he found a place where the world seems to end in thought. There he sat until the tide rose and spoke to it as to a master. The tide accepted him, as a litter accepts a guest, and bore him down along water alleys, with roofs of blue. The palace of the Sea King is not built of timber and tile. It is created from the order of kerns and the patience of coral. Pillars rise like the bones of ancient whales, and the floor is strewn with sand so fine that it keeps secret the softest step. Lantern fish hang like patient stars where the corridor needs light. The gates are guarded by fish with stern mouths and eyes that rotate like those of old generals remembering battles. There are gardens of seaweed swirling in slow dances and courtyards paved with shells. The lord of this city is called Watatsumi or Ryujin, and his beard stirs like a wave that has decided to sit and listen. Huri arrived at the gates and was recognized not by his face, but by the faithfulness of his approach. He stood with open palms and a slightly bowed head and asked to be heard. The gatekeeper, having seen many who demand and few who ask, led him inside. In all courts, there is a rule. The prince who knows how to wait is seated before those who shout their names. Huri was led to a pavilion where a woman sat with the stillness of water in a bowl. She was the daughter of the Sea King, and her name was Toyotama, which means abundant jewels. The name suits her. She was that shimmer you see when the moon presses its cool fingers to the surface. She looked up, and the room forgot how to breathe. The tales agree that love descended upon them, as love sometimes does with the precision of a hawk. It is not an arrow wounding by surprise. It is a swift alignment in which two forms suddenly fit each other, and the world makes a quiet, approving sound. The Sea King looked at his guest and, in a dozen heartbeats, read the signs of lineage and courtesy that sit like seals upon the brow. He welcomed the prince and asked about his business. Huri told the truth without embellishment. "I have lost my brother's hook," he said. "I seek it because the peace of my house requires that very hook which was given." Ryujin nodded. He sent for his fish. They came in a school that moved like a curtain drawn across a stage. He asked each if a hook had troubled its throat. A red sea bream twitched and opened its mouth. Servants extracted the hook from its gills and brought it on a seashell that glistened with the satisfaction of a task clearly performed. What followed was a time the tales delight in describing as joy. Huri remained in the palace as an honored guest, and the Sea King became a father to him. Toyotama became his wife. The description of their wedding is celebrated with images belonging to the ocean floor, and the lights that dwell there. Pearls were not merely ornaments, but stars allowed to descend a little lower. Crabs moved like scribes, tracing auspicious words upon the sand that does not know how to forget. The sea breathed in long cycles of contentment, and the palace breathed with it. There are myths that further remain in youth. This one, for a time, was allowed to become mature and happy, and that is a rare gift. However, home is a gravity that never sleeps. After 3 years, Huri felt a pull toward the mountains that had taught him lightness of movement, and toward the home where his father's counsel had once set him on this path. He came to his wife and asked permission to return to the upper world, promising swift news and a swift return. Toyotama listened as women who have loved princes listen. She did not bind his promise with chains. She only asked him to remember his duty to the sea. Her father placed in his hands two treasures to make the difficult encounter softer. They are called the tide-controlling jewels. One brings the water, and the other leads it away. With one, the plain can be flooded, with the other, it can be returned from the abyss. The Sea King was not in the habit of giving weapons without reason. He knew that Huri's quarrel awaited him like an undrained cup. He sent the jewels as instruments of peace that can be imposed by force if gentleness fails. The prince rose from the water onto the shore of familiar land and sought out his elder brother. Hoderi was no less stern than before, and perhaps a shade more proud. For resentment does not sleep in separation. Huri returned the lost hook. He did not scold. He did not lecture on forgiveness. He asked for peace and was refused. The older brother fished using rage as bait and cast nets of threats. Then Huri used the first jewel. He lifted it in his palm and spoke the word his father-in-law had taught him. The sea rose onto the shore, then into the street, and then onto the steps, until Hoderi found the water at his waist, then at his chest, and then at his very lips. He begged for mercy, a word that becomes heavy on a proud tongue. Huri lifted the second jewel, and the water receded like a bed that had been made and smoothed. Hoderi fell to the ground like a fish fallen from a basket. He promised obedience and, this time, kept his word. The quarrel ended in the only way some quarrels can end. Not in love, not yet, but in the recognition that there is a limit, and that a boundary can be a blessing. Now the sea, which had been but a stage and a palace, returned as a womb. For Toyotama followed her husband to the shore to bear their child on land. The old storytellers linger here with a tenderness that belongs to this figure more than many others. She is not only a princess with pearls in her name, she is a woman who must hold to nature's imbalance. She asked Huri to build a birthing hut on the sand and to cover its roof with thatch from the beach. She asked him for privacy, and she asked without pleading. "Do not look at me during the birth," she said. A taboo in such a tale is not an ornament. It is the very board upon which one must step to take the next stride. Huri promised, and for a time, the promise held. The course of the world is sometimes directed by curiosity as by a narrow door. The moment came when the prince forgot his promise. Perhaps he heard a cry, and fear broke through his resolve. Perhaps pride wished to see proof of its seed. Whatever the reason, he peered into the hut. He saw not a woman bent in pain, but the true form of a sea creature giving life on land. The text called this form Wani, a word that can indicate a dragon, a great reptile, or the sacred form of a creature created from the power of water. The sight shocked him, as a lightning strike can cause pain, even if it does not kill. He recalled. He had looked where he was asked not to look. He saw what should remain hidden, and with that sight, he shattered the charms that allow love to live above boundaries. Toyotama felt this rift like a cold. She did not rage. She did not plead. She wrapped the newborn in soft cloth and kissed him with the sorrow of a mother who must leave the cradle. She stepped out of the hut, entered the tide, and did not look back. She returned to the palace where the lanternfish hang in strict order. And she hid her pain, as women sometimes must, not because it is small, but because it is great and must be kept in a room where only the heart may venture to peek. The child was left in the care of a woman whose name carries the meaning of a precious jewel and a connecting thread. This was Tamayori, the younger sister, and she became the nurse and later the wife of the one she raised. Such loops of fate are not uncommon in ancient tales, for they tell of how houses fold inward upon themselves to keep the lineage alive. The boy received a name that sounds like a long sigh. Ugoi Fukiezu is an entire phrase meaning that the roof of cormorant feathers was never finished. A name that remembers a hut started and left incomplete because a promise was broken, and sent a mother back to her sea. He grew with the calm that is sometimes characteristic of children who have been watched over carefully. Tamayori taught him the proper bow at the threshold and the patience to listen to elders, telling the same story with a different ending. He married her when the years changed, and propriety allowed it to be arranged without scandal. And from their union were born sons whose names would write new pages. One of them would become a thread stretching from a vision to a capital, and from a capital to a calendar. But that belongs to the next chapter. The melodrama of the broken promise deserves another moment of attention. It is not a scene inserted for the humiliation of a hero or the blackening of a bride. It is the mechanism by which a culture explains why the crossing of borders requires reverence. A sea wife may love an earth husband, and an earth husband a sea wife. But there are conditions that protect both. A hut must be granted its secret. A vow cannot be treated as a toy. When vows are kept, worlds remain connected by a bridge. When they are broken, worlds return to their tides. And the child of their meeting must reconcile the loss by living a worthy life. Later crude interpretations of this tale do not erase its original intent. It asks listeners to respect what is requested in intimacy. It also asks them to accept that there are truths one should not demand to see. Hoderi did not vanish after his humbling. In the tale, he becomes a figure of dignified retirement. He accepted smaller waters and allowed luck to rest in younger hands. The tide jewels did not become toys of tyranny. They remained with Huri as a reminder that the Sea King recognized him as kin, and they were used sparingly, for good tools know when to stay in their casket. Peace between the mountain and the shore is a peace created every day, by people who prefer not to dominate with gifts given them by chance or by fathers. Huri himself did not take a throne to look down upon the fields. He is remembered as an ancestor rather than a lord. There is a particular pleasure in this, for ancestors feed longer than lords. He taught his sons where the stream undercuts the bank, and how to subdue it, with stones laid in a line pleasing to the water god. He taught them to bring offerings consistent with the temperament of the sanctuary, rather than displaying splendor where silence would be more appropriate. He kept close to the coast, where he could smell his mistake and thus maintain honesty, and where he could tell stories of a palace whose lanterns are living fish, without fear of being mocked. The sea princess did not forget him. Songs say that on certain nights she rose to the shore in the form of a dragon, remembering herself as a woman, and from afar watched the child playing in the sand. The little boy would look up and smile at a form that frightened other children, and then return to his play. That is how a wound sometimes heals. The mother would return to her coral chambers and listen to the reports of the sand crabs, who gossiped no worse than any lady in waiting. She lived as queens live who have been wounded, in dignity and in a silence that makes a spacious room feel as if an infant is sleeping behind a screen. Tamayori managed the household. In ancient poems, she is not a majestic figure, and yet without her, the line would have broken. She fed those who needed food. She taught those who needed teaching. She carried to the child the blessings of a sea that respects the one who did not respect it, a kind of grace that is stronger than resentment. In time, she married him and bore sons. Some tales give 4 names. What is important for the great narrative is the boy who will sire a leader. From that leader will come a man who will set a course for the east, summon a capital from rivers and marshes, and establish a throne for his descendants on a plain named after vines. But that is the labor of the next chapter. The sea palace remains submerged in blue, and its king remains attentive to news brought by the mullet and the eel. The tide jewels lie like thoughts in a box that no one opens until necessity comes in clean robes and explains itself. The brothers who began this tale learned their measure. The father who gave counsel is satisfied that the quarrel was closed without blood. The blossom who chose a mortal span watches over her grandchildren and remembers that brevity can be kind. The boy whose name is Unfinished Roof sleeps soundly in a house where both sea and land are present in the air. One as salt, the other as black earth. Cast one last look at the hut on the shore. The reeds are already dry, and its shadows have the exquisite look of ink applied by a careful hand. In the thatch, there is a place where the pattern is broken. The wind speaks there in a different voice, and when it speaks, if you have the habit of listening to stories, you can hear a mother telling her child that he must live with dignity. Since she cannot live with him, he lives with dignity. He becomes a father. He becomes an ancestor. Through him, a nation will create a memory pretending to be history, and a history remembering that it was once a myth. The sea understands. The land understands. They taught him. The child left on the shore rose as children rise when reliable hands support them. Ugoe Fukiezu learned the ways of both sea and land, and built a house where courtesy kept watch at the doors. He grew into a man with the calm of the ebb tide and the firmness of a mountain path. He married Tamayori, the aunt who had nursed him, and from their union were born 4 sons whose names would turn the hinge in the history of the islands. The eldest was Itsus, strong of hand and proud of shoulder. Then came Inohi, who felt the call of the waves in his dreams and later followed that call into the halls of the Sea King. The third was Mikari, who loved the hunt and the harsh corners of the earth. The youngest was Komu Yamato Iwebiko, whose name would be remembered as Jimmu, the one who would carry the promise to the east and plant it as a capital. The kingdom of Ninigi had ripened. The fields lay like open pages. The sanctuaries inscribed light into the air every morning. The legends lived quietly in the people, like water moves beneath the roots of rice. And yet, a feeling hung in the air that this labor needed a name and a throne, that the lineage which began with a mirror and a jewel must rise from myth and establish itself upon the plain. Iwebiko was not the loudest of the brothers. He was the one who listened to counsel, to omens, and to the ancient gods whispering in the foliage and river currents. He turned his gaze to the east, where the land of Yamato holds valleys waiting for rule and mountains sheltering great designs. There, as he was told, beats a heart that will throb for many centuries if approached with patience. The brothers gathered men who believed in roads more than in raids and built boats that trusted the strength of their frames. They set out from the southern islands with their supplies and household gods, and the sea acknowledged them with a long, slow rise of a wave. They landed at the port of Naniwa, where the river and the sea forget their quarrel and wed. There they met a chieftain named Nagasune Hiko, proud of the power that local success grants, and quick to anger at the claims of strangers whose titles flew in with the wind. The words that fell from his lips wounded deeper than blades. A skirmish followed. An arrow found its his ribs and cut short a life that had begun with such promise. The brothers mourned and retreated, for Iwebiko understood. A lost battle is sometimes a road offered by a god. They turned south and rounded the coast of Kumano, where mountains lean toward the sea and forests speak the language of shrines older than any courts. There, a deep sleep fell upon the company, an affliction that in such tales is never merely fatigue. It was a weight sent by a god wishing to test their resolve. In the dreams of Tokokuji, a humble keeper of storehouses, the deity of thunder and direct justice, Tokemi Kazuchi, placed a sword and a command. Give this blade into the hands of the chieftain sleeping in your valley, and the sleep shall break, and his path shall open. The man woke in fright and discovered the sword not only in his mind, but in his granary. As if thought had learned to be iron, he brought the weapon to Iwebiko, who accepted it with the respect a man shows a god who brings both victory and restraint. The sleep fell away from the company like a garment that had never fit. From Kumano they moved inland. On a day when the mist rose from the river in white sleeves, they met a guide whose sign has been known for centuries. The bird had 3 legs and the authority of a messenger. Her name is Amaterasu, and she belongs to those omens that even skeptics revere with trepidation. The bird did not shout commands. She flew forward, alighted, and flew again, drawing the company through gorges and across ridges onto the inner plain of Yamato. The men walked with the lightness of those who feel a hand upon their shoulder, and the land accepted them as a house accepts a rightful heir returned from wanderings. In time, the bird soared in a final bank and vanished against the sun, which was both witness and patron. The path lay open. Nagasune Hiko remained a thorn. He held the plain in the name of his habits and would not retreat. A new battle was joined. The sword that came from a dream showed what it had promised. Iwebiko did not boast. He drove the enemy from the field and, following this victory, made offerings to the gods of the hills and rivers he had crossed. For victories are not only fallen enemies, they are also a permission granted by the earth itself. He erected a throne in Koshihara, where the ground is level as if trued by a stonemason. There, as tradition tells, he became the first emperor man with a throne whose legitimacy is explained by a goddess of light in the lineage and a long corridor of divine patrons. Thus the age of gods placed a hand on the shoulder of the age of men and guided its first steps. From that day, the narrative less often leaves the halls of the sea and the forges of the heavens. It more frequently walks through markets, camps, and wheat fields. It follows rulers who call the sun their grandmother, and yet must deal with the stubbornness of taxes and roads. The lineage that began with a grandson born of the sea, and the shore moved forward through reigns that, in old chronicles, are long enough to satisfy nostalgia. Priests installed the mirror, the jewel, and the sword in their abodes of honor and taught that good rule reflects, binds, and protects. Children learned the names of the treasures and drew them in the dust. Kings hearkened to the reminders, carved in cedar and rope that thresholds matter. From this young lineage came a hero, whose name races through ballads like a gust of wind over a pond. He is called Yamato Takeru, the brave of Yamato, a prince with a gift for disguise and last chances. He is remembered not as a lawgiver, but as one who broke stubborn necks if those necks belonged to the enemies of the realm. He was the son of a later sovereign named Keiko, and his youth was a lesson in the danger of strength without calm. They say he killed a boorish kinsman with cunning, an act that no priest would bless, and yet his path lay not toward the throne, but toward the outskirts where order fails. There his qualities, hard and bright, found their stage. The first tale associated with his name belongs to the south. In the land of Kumaso lived two chieftains whose ferocity had become a proverb. They taxed without mercy. They took what was not offered and mistook fear for tribute. The court sent the prince to pluck this splinter. He did not march immediately with banners. He dressed as a maiden and entered the house where the brothers were feasting. Though he is easily deceived when pride has made it lazy, he sat among the dancers and servants. When the ale was late and the brew heavy in the veins of the hosts, he approached the elder and drew from beneath his dress a sword that remembered dark work. He struck the man where strength has no time to rise, and then slew the younger. The elder, dying on the mat he thought would hold him for many more nights, spoke with painful clarity. "You are truly the brave of Yamato. Take this name and leave this house to silence." The prince accepted these words, as a man accepts a heavy cloak, and wore it not without difficulty. A long campaign followed to the east, where the forests are thick and the rivers flow of their own accord. Rebellion nested where roads were few and shrines stood far apart. Yamato Takeru walked as a sharpened intent. Before setting out, he visited his aunt Yamato Haim, the priestess who kept the shrine of the sun at eyes. She received him not as a loving relative, but as a keeper of duty. She placed in his hands the sword that once lived inside a serpent, and later became a sign of reconciliation between the storm and the sunny day. Along with the sword, she gave a small magical bag containing the secret of fire of flint that would obey the voice of a man in danger. He accepted both with a bow, recognizing the importance of what he had been entrusted with. Myths become metal. On the eastern plain, treachery attempted to answer fate. A local lord invited the prince to hunt in the high grass. The men dispersed among the reeds, and suddenly the field sighed as fire woke in strips laid by the hands of traitors. The flames rose in a ring that tightened with the joyful malice of a net. The prince stood unswerving. He drew the serpent sword and slashed at the grass at his feet. The swing opened a passage. He took the bag from eyes, lit his own strip of flame, and whispered to the wind god to bear it outward. The wind obeyed the better plan. The counter-fire leaped, collided with the first conflagration, and overcame it, turning it into a red confusion that knew no direction. The prince walked through the smoke and outran the last tongues of flame hungering for his boots. He turned against the one who had invited him and settled accounts that no court later reopened. There were the contests. He led ships along jagged shores and taught river forts humility. He slew a boar that was more spirit than animal and left its tusks in wood as a lesson to hunters who loved to boast. He faced the god of Mount Ibuki, whose breath was cold enough to stop a heart. He thought to cut down the mountain itself and mocked the deity with a haughty challenge. The mountain god sent a storm of ice and vapor that knocked him from his feet and left him 4 days staggering with a sickness that no medicine could sweeten. From that moment, he carried within him a fragility like a crack in exquisite glaze. Heroes are not granted invulnerability, they are granted time for one more task. He visited the shrine where the serpent sword would one day be revered, not used the house called Otsuta, where the air seems to know how to maintain its composure. He sent the blade back to dwell there, for even a prince can grow tired of the weight of history. He crossed ridges, sat by river mouths, and remembered the wife he had married in the east. whose patience could stop a quarrel between warriors. He began the journey home, accompanied not by drums but by that quiet recognition a lone figure deserves. Sickness came. On the plain near Eyes, his strength faltered like a banner in a wind losing interest. He spoke to his friends of a white bird he had seen in his dreams. He lay down in the grass that knew the exact measure of his life. When he died, the air gained that clarity that often accompanies the last breaths of those who spent their days in service to a great house. His comrades built a tomb, like a small hill, and placed upon it hollow clay sentinels, looking outward to prevent offense. Then, as legends tell, a white bird rose from the mound and flew over marshes and bays, seeking a place where sorrow meets the sky. They followed it to a final resting place that felt right. Thus the man called brave in the mouth of a dying enemy left a sign that even sadness could admire. In these stories, one hears how a culture decides what it wants courage to look like. It is skill, not just muscle. It is wit to put on a dress and enter a house as a woman when war would have slammed the door. It is restraint to give the sword to a shrine and walk with lighter hands. It is the knowledge that fire lit in the right place can save a life, while fire in the wrong place can ruin a village. It is also the acceptance that even the sharpest edge cannot cut the law that all living things obey. The prince who did not fear the boar, the traitor, or the steep ridge could not overcome the cold of the mountain god he had mocked. His death gave the country a new kind of memory. Not a list of victories, though they were many, but a template by which to measure the use of force and the limits of men. From the throne in Koshihara, the lineage that called the sun their ancestors continued. Priests kept the mirror shining and the jewel safe and reminded young rulers that the sword is drawn last. Every spring, the fields looked up and asked if they could trust the hands that cultivated them. The answer was most often yes, because the hands remembered the grandson who descended the mountain with a blade, given by a storm god, and the youth who sailed under the sign of the three-legged bird, and the prince who once parted a wall of fire with a word and later allowed a spirit bird to carry his name over the marshes. These are the great signs. They taught small lessons, bow at thresholds, keep promises made at sea, invite laughter into councils, ask the mountain before stepping on its pride. The age of gods taught the rhythm of creation, loss, and return. The age of emperors added the connecting thread of law and the patience of chronicles. Together they created the history told in shrines, where ropes hang like full rivers in tombs, where clay figures look far into the fields, and in plays where a dancer stomps on a vat and awakens the sun. A people does not live by bread alone. It lives by the phrases it repeats to itself when storms awake and when seasons change. These chapters are such phrases,